African sky with all its stars. Walk on African soil, feel earth, heal your scars. Climb mountains, drink from fountains, cross streams towards your dreams. Yeah. Hey, yeah, yeah, people of Africa, southern skies and stars of the night of dreams of Africa. Hold on, hold on. Hey, hey, Abantu be Africa. Hey, yeah, Abantu be Africa. Tithi sonke masidibaneni. Inhliziyo zibezinye. Abantu be Africa.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember Spala. Here. Councilmember Kostick. Here. Councilmember Siemens. Present. Councilmember Smith. Here. Councilmember Searcy.
All right, terrific. We do actually have a change to our agenda this evening. We're scheduled to vote on the second reading ordinance approving a land exchange for Tacoma Park Recreation Center. We will not be taking that vote tonight, and the city manager will be providing more information on that. Other than that, the agenda is the same this evening. After tonight, moving forward, next week, our meeting is on the 24th. Sorry, I skipped all the way down to the 29th. Wednesday, the 24th, we'll be here. It's another public hearing on the tax rate and the FY 2020 budget. So if you have comments on that, please come to the public hearing, but also know that at any of our Wednesday night meetings, you can make comments during our public comment period. Our work session for the 24th will be a discussion of committee appointments and budget reconciliation. Then on Monday, April 29th, we have a council work session specifically on the budget reconciliation. And then on Wednesday, May 1st, our regular meeting here at 7:30, we'll have a voting session on a resolution supporting refugee resettlement in Tacoma Park, a single reading ordinance approving a contract for tree removal service, a resolution providing for appointments to committees, and that's it for May 1st. All right. All right. And then Wednesday, May 8th, we have a presentation from the president of Washington Adventist Hospital regarding the moving of the hospital. And we have our voting session will be the first reading ordinance adopting the FY 2020 budget and tax rate. I just paused because I think on Wednesday, May 1st, we tentatively may be continuing the conversation on budget reconciliation. So it's just because I was just provided information that So we may have to continue the conversation on May 1st. Okay, we could. Yeah. May, tentatively, yes. All right, moving now to public comments on voting items. The only voting item we have tonight is our consent agenda that has a resolution providing for an appointment to the committee, on the environment, and a resolution providing for appointment to the facade advisory committee. Any public comments on that? Seeing none, we will actually now move to our voting session. Would someone like to move the consent agenda?
Move it.
Councilmember Siemens moved it, Councilwoman Costick seconded it. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right. We also have minutes this evening from April 3rd and April 10th. Some small changes have been sent to the city clerk for regarding those minutes. Would someone like to move the minutes? Councilwoman Costick, do I have a second? Councilmember Kovar. Any other comments or questions on the minutes? No? All those in favor of adopting the minutes from April 3rd and our April 10th meeting, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, we've adopted the minutes. Now we'll move on to other public comments this evening. Mr. Lovelace will get you the microphone, but is there anyone else that would like to go first for public comments? Please do so. Oh, I'll do that, yeah. Go ahead.
David Navari, 7116 Sycamore Avenue. First, I want to commend the city staff for working to improve the content and the structure of the budget documents. The proposed 2020 budget recommends a 5.68% citywide average real estate tax increase, which is 3.34 times the inflation rate of 1.7%. Does this meet the city's fiscally sustainable government objective? The city's attempt to use the ECI index as an external metric is an excellent step in the right direction, as it provides the council an objective target for a sustainable tax rate growth. Page 14 and 15 of the proposed budget features Your Dollars at Work, which lists all the city services. It is a point of fact that the city staff, the council, nor the mayor can tell the citizens what each of these services costs. Service costs cannot be calculated because staff time on task is not tracked. I met with the city manager and each member of the council over the last year to discuss this fact. A review of the budget shows that approximately 75% of the budget is directly linked to payroll and benefits versus capital expenditures, debt, and other costs. Transparency sounds good, but no comprehensive accounting of 75% of Tacoma Park's budget exists. Sure, we know exactly what the departments cost, but not what the services cost, because staff is not required to track time on task, as every federal contractor and nonprofit is required to do. Our consulting firm did this when we had 10 employees, and we did this when we had 100 employees, as do many government departments which want to track service costs. I spoke with a friend who said they had asked a city council member how much time and money has been spent on the Tacoma Park Junction. On 2 occasions, the city council member said he would get back to them. The correct answer was, I don't know, because I'm embarrassed to say Tacoma Park does not track labor cost by project. There's more work to do, and I know we can do better because I've spoken with a lot of smart, dedicated staff. A good start would be tracking and reporting where 75% of our taxes go and what we get for those expenditures. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Oh, actually, Mr. Lovelace, yes, you have the microphone.
Okay, this is Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. And I want to bring up a thing about a festival coming up in D.C. on the 20th. That's this Saturday. Starts at 12 o'clock and goes on to who knows when. It's the cannabis demonstration to celebrate International Day of the Weed, to celebrate what Colorado did when they first legalized marijuana. And I'd like to see when our council goes back out to the MML or meets with the House of Delegates, I'd like to see them push for a full legalization of marijuana. Because there's going to be some people who ain't going to be able to afford to get on the medical marijuana program. And they'll be able to get it anywhere they want to get it if they legalize it totally in Maryland. So we got to do that. We got to work on that. And also keep your eyes and ears open for upcoming demonstrations on what's his name? The investigation report on Trump's that big investigation they did is coming out tomorrow, and they're going to see what we can do. But keep your eyes and ears open for demonstrations, because you people have got to be told this is the time for community participation. You know, and I try to stress that. And also, never fail to register to vote. Because I want to tell everybody to remind their 16-year-old friends that they now have the right to vote in Maryland, Tacoma Park. And they should take that right. And I'd like to see other people doing what they can to work for peace. And I'm telling everybody out there who's listening, watch your children on the, now that the summer's coming up, on the street festivals, because you don't want to have them disappear. Don't just tell them to stand here and walk off. Because I've seen that happen. And the kids stayed over with me, and the mother came back. And I told half an hour later, because she wanted to get a blanket in the car. She came back a half an hour later. You know, if they didn't, the kid doesn't know me from a hole in the wall. Oh, yep. And I'd like to say thank you very much. I'm glad to be back at the meeting.
Thank you, Mr.
Love
Lovelace.
it, love it, love it.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Priscilla Labovitz. I live at 7303 Birch Avenue. I'm on the rec committee. I'm a friend of the Tacoma Park Rec Center. And now I'm part of the Racial Equity Working Group. I just want to thank the city, the council, the staff for making What's My Bias available to members of the community. I learned so much. I thought I knew, but I didn't know so much about the pain, the microaggressions, the pain that people of color experience over and over again, the extra steps they need to take to prove or to look like they're unthreatening people. And I had no idea of the advantages that I enjoy as a white woman. I just have taken it all for granted. I'm a nice person. I thought people just react to me and the things that I say. I think that everybody, apparently with at least one exception, thought that it was intensely valuable, and I really appreciated that it was provided to us. The level of discussion was very high. There was insight after insight. There was, to my knowledge, and I missed one meeting, there was never any discussion about the food co-op. It was about what's my bias. It wasn't about how are we, in this group, how are we going to fix Tacoma Park or decide how we're going to act from now on to reduce the inequities in our lives. So thank you very much. Please do it again. It is worth paying for. And I'm sorry that there aren't more people who know what happened last week that would show up here and tell you what they've experienced, which I think is all to the good. Thank you. And since I have 48 seconds, I will throw in, I will sing this song. No, that I don't mind paying another, I live in an expensive house, and now an expensive house in Ward 1, and I don't mind paying an extra $134 in property taxes for what we have. That gives me 27. Okay, so I think that people who, you probably know this, that people will come here and say, well, this is an outrage, and this is my money, and all of that, and yes, it is their money. But it is, we choose to live here, and we choose, and I realize there are some things we maybe don't need to do, but this is not the place to save money. And the people who are willing to spend money, I think, are underrepresented behind this microphone. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Must be nice. Good evening, Paul Hubner, Ward 3. As the budget analysis continues, I wanted to be clear on my suggestions, goals, and reasoning. I fully support the union agreements for public works employees, good wages, good benefits, and working conditions for all rank and file employees. What I question are the very high salaries and the number of supervisors and managers. City manager makes $195,000 per year plus benefits. The deputy manager makes as much as the county council president of Montgomery County. With their assistance, their office alone costs some $568,000 a year in wages and benefits for 3 people. In addition, there are 20 managers and directors averaging about $125,000 per year plus benefits. And in spite of the number of managers that have been hired by the city, a substantial number of items are subcontracted out for management and execution. The police chief search, for instance, the junction legal contract analysis of the contract, engineering studies for every capital project has their own private engineer, state ordered because it's state funded. Just last week, for instance, the council approved $50,000 for a sustainability action plan. Yet the sustainability manager has gone from $78,000 a year plus benefits to a proposed $109,000 per year and another $46,000 in benefits, a 40% increase in 3 years during a period when the performance metrics have declined dramatically. Our managers and directors can earn an average of 20% more than Greenbelt City staff. Tacoma Park City managers and directors make more than our county council members, with our city manager earning as much as the Montgomery County executive. Our city management, additionally, has not built an achievable budget for any of their capital projects, nor completed a project on schedule. The dog park doubled in cost. The city has taken out a $7 million bond for the library renovation that is already projected to cost $8 million, with no construction estimate to date. In closing, I would like to say that as a resident of Tacoma Park, I stand against the budgeted increases for either number or salary of city management staff. I suggest that city departments look for ways to execute a 10% across-the-board cut in personnel costs, upper-level personnel. Lastly, I feel you must re-examine when and how to pace these capital projects for the city of Tacoma Park. Sometimes you can't always get what you want. The current pattern of salary increases and capital project cost outlays is not consistent with the financial health of this community. Put the residents first.
Thank you, Mr. Huberman. Any other public comments this evening?
Arthur David Olson, Hancock Avenue. It must be budget season. Unlike some Tacoma Park residents, I think it's okay to raise property taxes. I know the council agrees with me, having raised them 5 years straight. Yes, there have been reductions in property tax rates, but those have been more than offset by increases in assessed values, and the final tax bite has been deeper. For example, page 30 of the budget shows total property tax revenue increasing from last year's audited $12,094,000 to an estimated $12,650,000, an increase of about $558,000, or 4.9%. Page 30 of the budget also shows an increase of this year's estimated $12,650,000 to $13,530,000, an increase of about $875,000, or about 6.9%. That increase is greater than last year's and is far greater than inflation. I hope the council can do a better job of matching property tax increases to people's increased ability to pay them. For me and for other federal retirees and employees, the best measure of that increased ability is the federal cost of living adjustment. This year, that adjustment was 1.8%. 1.8% is also the city's current rent stabilization increase rate. That drops to 1.6% in the coming fiscal year. I'd argue that's what sauce for the private goose is sauce for the public gander. If the city directs landlords to limit the percentage of rent increases, it ought to observe the same limit on tax increases. I think of this as tax stabilization. The bottom line, I hope the council will limit the property tax rate increase to 1.8% above the constant yield rate. And I've done the math. That's a rate of about 53.55 cents. Raising tax rates faster than income growth is financially unsustainable and is inconsistent with the goal of having an affordable community. Thank you.
Okay, any other public comments this evening? No? All right. Seeing none, now we'll move on to council comments. Any council comments tonight? Councilwoman Kostick.
Thank you. I wanted to announce I am having office hours to discuss the budget with anyone who is interested in stopping by. I had office hours yesterday at Tacoma Bevco, and I will be at Spring Mill next Tuesday from 6 to 7 o'clock. Feel free to drop by. I think Councilmember DeBala may also be there as well. She can announce that. We're both planning on holding hours at around the same time. Of course, I'm always happy to talk with people outside of that time as well, so please feel free to contact me. But that's a good time. You know where I am. You feel free to drop by and chat if you would like to. I also had a Transportation Planning Board meeting today and have a few updates from that. We declared May 17th to be Bike to Work Day and had some information from WABA and some other area bicycle association members regarding plans for that. There will be 2 pit stops in Tacoma Park, one in Old Town and one along New Hampshire Avenue, I believe. And you can go online to www.biketoworkmetrodc.org. If you go ahead and register before the event, they know you're coming, they can get you a t-shirt, and you can participate and get updates as well. And if you feel really motivated, it is also Bike to Work Month and Bike to Work Week, so feel free to take your pick among those 3. We also had a presentation from the district DOT as part of our request to have each of the DOTs from the district, Maryland, and Virginia come to the TPB to present on their efforts regarding the reduction of serious injuries and fatalities in the region. So we heard last month from Virginia, and we heard today from the district, and next month will be from Maryland. And one of the things that I specifically asked them about was Eastern Avenue, which has been an area of concern, particularly the intersection at Walnut and the crosswalk there. And I asked them a little bit about their process for deciding when a crosswalk warrants a flashing light and a call signal. And so I got a little more information about that. I think that's something we probably will need to continue to follow up with DDOT on. But it was useful to hear from their new Vision Zero coordinator about some of the improved work that they're working on, improved work and improvements for the future that they're working on. There are also a couple of upcoming events I wanted to announce related to transportation. One is that the Maryland DOT is going to be holding several workshops regarding the Beltway expansion plans. There already have been a few, and there are a couple closer to Tacoma Park that will be happening next week. One is in Greenbelt on Tuesday at 6:30 p.m., And another is, it's the same time as our meeting here, on Wednesday, April 24th at 6:30 p.m. In Silver Spring at Eastern Middle School. So I encourage people to go out and voice your opinions on Beltway expansion. There is also a dockless vehicle workshop that the TPB is planning on May 30th, which I think will be very informative, and we'll have some insights regarding some of the lessons learned in terms of dockless bikes and scooters, some of the policy efforts that might need to be improved in order to make those things work more smoothly and create safe environments. And that is open to the public, but there is, they encourage people to register ahead of time. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Councilmember DeBala?
Yes. Hello, everybody. First, as Councilmember Kostick said, I'm going to be continuing the budget meetings again on Tuesday, 5 to 7 at Spring Mill Bakery. I would be moving next door, but they don't allow laptops in Soul Food. Oh well. So we'll fit.
It'll be nice.
It'll be fine.
We'll hang out.
Secondly, a few thank yous. Thank you to City TV staff for what you do every week, but I got to watch it on Monday. And it was really, even with some of the technical difficulties of being in the recreation center, which is its own challenge, laying all that cable and being able to broadcast live, it was pretty awesome to be able to watch. And thank you to city staff for answering all the budget questions that I submitted because I wasn't able to sit here and ask them. And finally, thank you to the police department for sending 3 officers to testify last Thursday at the Congress restaurant, hearing on the 5 violations, alcohol-related violations. One of you is nodding right now. I guess you were there. You can tell me about it afterwards, but I wanted to note that. And the last thing I want to mention is not city, but Tacoma Foundation has a few things going on. One is for those of you who are with a PTA or some other community nonprofit, the spring grant cycle is closing at the end of this month. If you want to talk to me or anybody on the foundation board about it, it's you don't have to be a 501c3 to apply. And the second thing is it's Azalea Awards time. So once again, if anybody in the community wants to nominate a resident for any of the, I think it's up to 10 categories now. 11. Teachers, mentors, sports coaches, all the people behind the scenes and in the community that make this place tick.
New this year is for city employees too.
And a new one this year for city employees. I was just getting that. Yeah. So that would be something for you all to know. That's it for me. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith?
I want to thank city staff for coming out last Thursday for the construction meeting for the Flower Avenue Green Street project. It was an excellent turnout. The presentation is online, so if you just search the city's website, you can see it. The actual construction will start April 29th, and the project will run for 1 year. I also want to let people know that on April 24th, we will have Coffee with a Cop at Mansa Kunda restaurant at 8000 Flower Avenue. So please come out. You can ask the police department any question that you might have. There is no agenda, so it's going to be just a loose conversation. Thank you.
And the croissants are amazing. Amazing. The 24th. Any other comments tonight from the city council? Okay, seeing none, a couple of things. Today was the opening of the Crossroads Farmers Market on Ann Street. It was a terrific day, and I hope everyone gets out there. That's every Wednesday from 11 to 3 o'clock. Also, I just want to thank everybody who helped out on Sunday for the food distribution at New Hampshire Towers. I was told by a young man that you're supposed to call it NHT. It's not New Hampshire Towers, they're NHT. So it was a great day. I just want to thank Roxanne, Doris Duarte, Brian Gehring, and everyone who helps out doing that. And they do it once a month. And so if other people would like to volunteer, please let me know and I can connect you with them. In addition, on Saturday evening, I was able to go to Team DC's Dinner of Champions. It is the LGBTQ Sports Club Association, and one of our residents, Camden Roberts, who lives here.
And she's an employee.
And she's employed, I was going to say, she works at the rec center, is the recipient of one of their scholarships this year, and she's going to Rochester next year. So it was great to see her get this on Saturday night. And the last thing I would like to ask that I forgot on Monday night as we prepare for budget reconciliation, I realized in our budget that we do not, and I know Mr. Buberman will not like the sound of this, but we do not have money to for a consultant that we've talked about regarding the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center. We've raised this as something we would like to do as we move forward with this process, and I'd ask that before we have our meeting next Wednesday that we talk to the staff and think about a good recommendation to put on the reconciliation list. And that's it for me. I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you. A couple things. We finally heard that we will now have a member on the Tower Commission, the Transmission Facilities Coordination Group for Montgomery County. That has been in process for a really long time, but apparently it's now been approved that we can have a representative. Public Works Director Daryl Braithwaite will be our representative. Construction Manager Ian Chamberlain will be an alternate for her. I think their first meeting that she'll attend is May 1st. So one of the interesting things coming up is the giant crocheted octopus will be moved next Tuesday. So, and I know that one of our members of the audience will appreciate, it was originally called Oct-o'clock. Then when we decided that we wanted to, and it was living on the top of the Old Town Clock Tower for 6 months, it's time for it to move on. We did a contest called Octagon, where applicants could submit a short essay or video explaining why they wanted the octopus, where they would put it, and what its new name would be. And the Tacoma Children's School submitted the winning video. We'll be putting the newly named Octoshedopus on top of the shed in their playground, which is visible to the public on Aspen Street between Willow Street and Laurel Street, so just outside of the city of Tacoma Park, but part of the Tacoma Park community. The school will be moving the 17-foot tall crocheted octopus from the Old Town Clock Tower to their playground in a parade that will take place on on Tuesday, April 23rd at 10:30 a.m. Different people are gonna hold different of the tentacles and move it along to this new shed home, and all are welcome to attend. And it's going to be videoed and the whole bit. So it's actually the video that the kids put together saying that they wanted it was pretty cute. So that's nice. Another kind of feel-good story, the City of Tacoma Park Recreation Department partnered with Montgomery Parks and the City of Rockville for the Lighted Up Blue Autism Awareness event at the Agricultural History Farm Park on April 6th. And this is part of their real effort to make connections with people with special needs or with other challenges. And so there were hands-on activities, live music, a glow walk, and there were live farm animals. The description was you could meet with live farm animals. I'm not sure how that worked. But there's a nice little story that one of our recreation department passed on, that a dad attended with his 5-year-old son who has autism, who rarely speaks or interacts with others. The boy's mother is deployed overseas. They were participating in the various stations, and when they arrived at the petting station, the young man's eyes lit up, and he repeated the names of the different animals to the staff and his father. His father broke down in happy tears, explaining that his son rarely speaks that much, and he knew his wife would be overjoyed when she learned about the experience and their son's reaction. And the dad expressed his great appreciation for the participation of the various recreation departments in this event. So it's just nice to hear. I appreciate it. It's also a good learning opportunity for our staff as they participate in these kinds of events. So that's very nice. That's all I have.
Any questions for the city manager? Nope. Okay, and then we will then move on to our work session this evening. It's our legislative wrap-up with our legislative advocate, who will ask to come on up here.
So do you want me to talk about the rec center after her? This was fine.
Oh, yeah, why don't you do it now? Sorry, I'm sorry, Alice.
Okay, so
I thought you were going to do it during your city manager comments, and then I got so wrapped up into the story, I
there you go.
completely
Okay.
forgot. I literally just completely forgot.
Well,
Sorry.
that's
Why don't
fine.
we do that? Yes.
It should just take a moment. So this evening there was for this evening was to be the second reading ordinance of the ordinance to approve the land exchange for the Tacoma Park Recreation Center. And very late yesterday, I received an email saying that a different attorney from Maryland National Capital Park and Planning had reviewed the document that I had signed, the letter of intent, which had been prepared on a draft that they had prepared. So just kind of putting that there. And there were a number of changes that this new attorney wanted to make. Some of these changes really didn't quite make sense for us as a jurisdiction. I think there was simply some not being familiar with the project. So this morning, had a phone call, got it straightened out. There were some good recommendations, I think, for changes of the language in the letter of intent, which also implies some changes to the draft, to the ordinance. And the couple things that they did, one was the previous document referenced a condition about obtaining access an easement across the Tacoma Overlook property to the recreation property. That access agreement has been recorded now, so it doesn't need to be put as a condition. It could simply indicate that it has been recorded. Apparently, it's not appropriate to have, if you don't do this, then it reverts back to the previous owner. That's not how they tend to like to have their documents. So instead, it has statements to the effect that Montgomery County Park and Planning will use the Jackson Avenue property for public open space, and the city will use the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center property for recreation. Then it will have language that says that, consistent with the master plan, that there's a whereas in the draft ordinance that will come to you, that the city intends to pursue a mixed-use redevelopment of the property to build a new recreation center plus housing or local retail per the approved and adopted Tacoma-Langley Crossroads Sector Plan. And if the city pursues a development that deviates from that intended plan and does not do recreation, then the city must first obtain prior approval from the Montgomery County Planning Board. So it's consistent with our intent and our understanding from the beginning, but they want it written in a different way. I actually think that what they came up with is cleaner, but our city attorney has not had a chance to review it yet. And obviously, Councilwoman Searcy is not here, and it's in her ward. So with not a deadline impending, I asked that it be rescheduled for that second reading with these modifications after the attorneys looked at it. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Any questions on that?
Yeah,
Councilwoman Duvall?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So, looking at the revised ordinance.
I just wrote some notes from that. I haven't run that past our attorney. So just, those were notes that that's my recommendation from what I have heard.
Right.
Right.
So when you get to asking him, the part about what happens if the city changes their use
Right.
is rephrased. The part about what happens if MNCPPC changes their use appears to be cut out and not rephrased.
It's
So
moved to a
could
different
we-
place, and they.
Where is it? Where
I
is
think
it?
it's, well, it's in the letter of intent, and earlier, they want to affirmatively say that they will be adding it to Long Branch Stream Valley Park. So as opposed to
Right.
our assumption that that's what they would want to do, they are saying that's their intent, that's what they're planning on doing.
Right, and if they don't, the title is conveyed back to the city, is crossed out. And so I would like to see in the letter of intent, or in here, or both, actually, a rephrasing that parallels the rephrasing of the other one.
I'll check on how that works best. I appreciate that.
Great. All right.
Thank you.
Now we are ready for our legislative update. Sorry about that.
Great. Thanks for having me come out tonight. I do want to just note, as I exchanged emails with some of you today, this is the earliest that we have done our post-session wrap-up report. And so with that in mind, the legislature just wrapped up last Monday, the 8th. And so I don't have all of the final documents that I typically do when we're meeting a few weeks from now. So there might be a couple of occasions where you ask me a question and I tell you I'm still waiting to see what the final version of something is. But and if something is missing, it might be that we need to just come back once some of the documents are out, like final fiscal and policy notes. We're still waiting for the one I was really hoping to have would be the joint chairman's report, which is the narrative that accompanies the budget. And that's not out yet. We expect it any day, but it hasn't come out yet. And so there's still some outstanding questions for what language made it in from the conference committee between the two chambers when they went through the budget. We get the final numbers and the budget bill, but the actual narrative that the two committee chairs agree on, which has some of that very valuable budget language that the city has used in the past, that is not out and publicly available yet. So with that, I think we had a really great session. I feel I'm just so pleased with how the legislative session went this year. It was very challenging. Just overall, there have been there was a big election, a lot of new members, a lot of leadership changes. As we talked about in the legislative preview in the fall, we had 3 new committee chairs and all new vice chairs in the Senate. So 3 out of 4 committee chairs were new. We had major committee changes membership-wise in the House. And then throughout the session, as you're probably aware, challenges with leadership and the situation with the speaker's health and speaker passing away the day before the session ended, and the Senate President Mike Miller also having some serious health concerns. So that loomed over the session along with so many new members, and then the governor being reelected, and just a lot of navigating to do this session. And so I think from a process standpoint, it was frustrating at times just for advocates throughout session on what was happening and what was getting done. But come March, we started looking around and realized that a lot of really good things were getting through. And I would say that a lot of really good conversations have started happening, and I feel like the legislature is recognizing they have challenges coming up, especially when we talk about the state budget. As you're experiencing here, the state has budget challenges. They are working to pass the Kirwan Commission recommendations, which has a really large price tag that right now we don't know how the state is going to pay for it, but they've committed to moving forward with the recommendations, and it's going to be piecemeal right now, and I won't spend too much time on that unless you're all interested in it. But there are a lot of big conversations that need to happen, and so what we saw was the legislature took a number of topics such as sports betting, legalization of adult use of marijuana, and they are putting those into active work groups to talk about during the interim, and they're trying to look at other ways to raise revenue, hopefully trying to avoid raising taxes. And so they're trying to have some interim work groups study some of these issues and to come back in 2020 and start to tackle them on legislative. So with that, we, on behalf of the city, we tracked over 200 bills this session, which was a lot more than we have in previous sessions, and submitted testimony on at least 20 bills. So I also want to say that I think we were able to find some bills where the city was able to provide really helpful and constructive testimony. There were situations where the city was discussing amendments on some economic development issues that I was so surprised that no one else picked up. And I was talking to the State Chamber of Commerce and the Retailers Association and saying, hey, you've missed some things in this bill. Does anyone know why? And no one knew why, but the folks for the city had addressed that. So we were able to submit testimony with suggestions of amendments that sometimes were even adopted. And so I think that we worked on really making effective testimony and communication with the legislators. So with that, we focused, as we talked about during the legislative preview, the city's priorities included economic development, preventing the widening of Route 410, protecting small businesses during construction, such as the Purple Line, looking for opportunities to increase municipal revenues, housing and landlord-tenant issues, continuing to work on utilities, and climate change. And I think we saw a lot of bills starting and conversations that are starting at the state level that have a long way to go, but on some of the things that the city has been making a lot of headway on, such as really trying to view projects, policies, legislation through a climate lens, as well as a racial equity lens. And those conversations are just getting started at the state and in Annapolis. And I think that there are going to be some opportunities where the city can use your experience dealing with those issues and try and educate some of the legislators that in Annapolis on ways to do that. So we'll continue to look out for ways to partner. The city was successful in receiving $150,000 in bond bill funding for the Takoma Park Library. This goes along with the 2017 funding, also for $150,000, and that was in big part thanks to our entire District 20 delegation, but Senator Smith and Delegate Moon, who are the sponsors on that. For economic development assistance, the city has weighed in the past on the National Capital Strategic Economic Development Fund, starting 3 sessions ago with the bill getting passed, last session working to help get initial funding for it. This session, we came back with major changes to this program to change it from a grant-making fund to more of a program. And this was one of the bills that we were able to weigh in on with amendments to make sure that government entities could be eligible for the funding. But this is really specific to really inside the Beltway communities in Montgomery County and Prince George's County that meet like the opportunity zone criteria. It's not a lot of communities are going to fit the criteria. Takoma Park will be one of those. So with this legislation this year, Also dedicated funding for the next couple of fiscal years of $7 million. So now that there's actually a really substantial program in place, there's also a good amount of funding allocation for it. I'm hopeful that there will be something for the city to take advantage of within that program. Also passed were a large sort of omnibus bill that dealt with some economic development, including opportunity zones. The city weighed in on an opportunity zone specific bill with help from Councilmember Searcy, and did suggest an amendment that they didn't adopt, I think just because it wasn't in the overall program, how they were viewing the program. So the opportunity zones, the way that the state is looking at it is that they want it to apply to large-scale redevelopment. So whether it's a large housing redevelopment or like a shopping center redevelopment versus an individual business, they're looking to invest in a redevelopment that is going to significantly change an area and bring more economic growth to it. So, but I still think there's a lot of good value in that legislation, and it was good to have those conversations with other organizations that we haven't had the opportunity to work with in the past. The small cell tower permitting issue, this has come up before. Last year, we were in a position of scrambling to defeat a late filed bill from the industry that would have preempted local governments from having permitting. This year, you saw two competing bills. There was an industry bill, and then there was a bill proposed by local governments. And neither one of them was moved. Instead, the legislature said, this is a complicated issue. We should look at this more in depth rather than in the short 90 days. So they have assigned both bills to an interim study, which is a win for us. The more discussion that we can have on it, and as long as no bad bills are passing, it's still a win position. On the issue of municipal revenues, we don't often see bills that come in that would provide the opportunity for increased municipal revenues. So it was great to see a bill that the city weighed in on that would allow for municipalities to collect the hotel tax on smaller hotels with less than 10 rooms. That is an opportunity in and of itself. The state also passed legislation that would require sales and use tax to be collected on short-term rentals such as Airbnb. And it's not entirely clear right now if the two go hand in hand, and if municipalities would then be able to start collecting on those entities, or if that's something where it's a next step to say, okay, great, now that you're doing the sales tax on those rentals, let's make sure the hotel tax applies. And I think if those two things can go together, that would be really helpful, especially given the city's proximity to the district. Transportation, we had a lot of transportation bills on a number of topics, including the Beltway widening, and this plays into the city's priority bill for preventing the widening of Route 410. So the city was advocating for local legislation that would have prevented the state highway administration from spending funds to expand 410. And that bill was in along with another local bill that was similar, that dealt with prohibiting Beltway expansion unless it was approved by the county government, and sort of a request to focus efforts from Montgomery County on preventing Beltway expansion. And that was a major lift, and at this point we haven't been successful at the state level. But I'm trying to find out if there's any language that made it into the Joint Chairman's report. That was one of the things that was discussed. The House put language in, the Senate rejected it, but I haven't seen if there's final language in there that would withhold some money. Delegate Mark Corman really pushed to have language that would have restricted significant funding from Department of Transportation until until they basically reevaluated the project and waited for the environmental impact analysis to be done. But as you know, there's still a lot of effort that is going on there to prevent the Beltway expansion, and we'll continue to monitor and keep you updated on those discussions. Along with that issue, the city weighed in on several pedestrian safety bills and a bikeway funding, bikeway network funding and study bill, along with supporting some adjustments to the metro funding and safety bill from last session. We monitored a number of bills that dealt with state highway and sidewalks, trying to increase the amount of funding for sidewalks in priority areas, and the Vision Zero legislation, which is similar to, I guess, what you said DC has. So a lot of bills on that topic, and as well as the environment. So this year, there was a major effort to pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which would increase the state's renewable energy portfolio to 50% by 2030. And that did pass, along with the statewide ban on polystyrene, making Maryland the first state to have a statewide ban in the country, as well as legislation that would increase the state's tree canopy and forest areas, and have reporting requirements on greenhouse gas emissions for transportation projects. Other major issues that did come up this session that we monitored and discussed include the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is the Kerwin Commission legislation, the Fight for 15 legislation that passed, restoring local control of the school calendar, which is something the city has been very interested in, and protecting oysters, which is very, very big. That was a very controversial legislation, vetoed by the governor. The veto had to be overridden, so major legislation there. As I mentioned, there were some bills, such as the Route 410 bill, that were not successful. Along with that, I would also say it's the Just Cause legislation that the city put a lot of effort into, and advocacy, and as well as the county. And it was not successful. Both bills, I think, had challenges in the same committee for some similar reasons. And it was very interesting to a lot of folks to see that, especially on the Just Cause legislation, that there was a lot of testimony for a local bill, including the county executive, and County Council member Tom Hucker came and testified, as well as a representative from the city's housing department. Very robust hearing for a local bill that had wide support through the local delegation. And it was voted down, which typically you have a rule, or you have a policy of local courtesy, that when a local county wants something that only affects them, they get local courtesy. And so that is a standout from this session. As I mentioned, the state is looking at long-term revenue projections, which continue to be a challenge. The Kerwin Commission legislation that I mentioned has a projected cost of $3.8 billion a year. That'll be a share from the state as well as local governments, but that's a big price tag to look at, as well as considering that revenue projections went down. They went down this year in the middle of session. They had to do a budget write-down, which they don't typically have to do, but they were able to address the shortfall that was projected for fiscal 2020 and the revenue write-down in this year's budget, while still maintaining a healthy savings in the general fund and in the rainy day fund. The amount of local aid to, or state aid to local governments did increase. It more than doubled, 6.9%, with Montgomery County receiving an increase of 6.5%. A lot of that is going to come from the highway user revenue that we passed last year, which municipalities will get 2% of, which it comes out to almost $38 million. And within all of that, all of the budget debates, as I mentioned, the city did receive the $150,000 bond bill, and also in the capital budget is $6.5 million in funding for the renovations at the Montgomery College's Tacoma Park and Silver Spring campus. So I always enjoy working for you all and being able to present the legislative priorities for you. And I would say, in addition to it being, I thought, a pretty successful session for the city, I think that we, the District 20 delegation, which is a new team, they really did well this session. And we've seen Senator Smith and Delegate Moon have both moved up very quickly into some leadership positions, and Delegate Wilkins was able to really take on, she was able to introduce a number of the amendments that we talked about, and through her committee, since it deals with taxes, and having Delegate Charkoudian on the Economic Matters Committee is not a position that District 20 has had in any recent past, and so having her voice on that committee, which often is challenging, especially bringing some of the more progressive values to the issues that the committee deals with, is a challenge, and I think that she really handled that exceptionally well. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think I can speak for all of my colleagues and the staff to say that we too felt like it was a very successful year. And thank you very much for your partnership in this and your work on behalf of the city in Annapolis. Thank you. Councilwoman Kostick, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. It was really great to work with you, and it was great to hear your report, because as we were going through the process, there's so much happening at the time. I feel like you often lose sight of the bigger picture, and so it's great to have a chance to review it and hear all of the really good things that happened, and not get so into the minutia. A couple of things that you said actually reminded me of some additional things I wanted to point out related to these that I learned at the TPB meeting today, and then I have a question as well. One thing was related to the legislation that would establish the Vision Zero policy for the state as a whole. I did ask the MDOT representative on the TPB today what he thought, what impacts he thought that would have, and he is not himself very involved in that, but he did say that there were several representatives from MDOT and SHA who were in a meeting today and this afternoon discussing that specific topic. So I think there could be some real opportunities for us as a city coming out of that to look at pedestrian safety in particular. The other thing was on the Kojo Namdi show yesterday, there was a discussion of the Beltway widening, and there were two people on there who were former members of the TPB's Citizens Advisory Committee and had some discussion about some of the efforts of the TPB. So I encourage people to take a listen to that if you have an opportunity. And then I wanted to just follow up with you and ask you, you mentioned the work group, and I know the small cell issue has been sent for a summer study. What does that involve exactly? And are there opportunities for us on an ongoing basis to have input in that process?
Yeah, it will depend. So there are work groups, and then there's summer study, which is, they're different. So the work group, for example, on adult use of marijuana, they have named legislative chairs, members of the legislature who will be participating in that work group, and they should have public meetings that are announced in advance where they would take it's not the same as a public hearing, so they typically organize speakers to come and then would have some limited public comment, and then they typically meet and discuss and write up a report with recommendations. A summer study is whatever really the committee chairs want it to be. It can be robust. It can be just something that gets sent to a staffer in Department of Legislative Services to write up a report that they think is whatever they think that their directive is. So on that issue specifically, we will be following up with the sponsors of the bills, but we can also reach out to Delegate Charkoudian on that, since the bills go through her committee. So she could probably offer us some extra information and be helpful there. So there can be opportunities on that bill, but it's just I don't know what they're going to allow at this point in time.
Thank you very much.
And I didn't point out to you or explain the various documents. So you have my narrative, but one of the things I put together, which I hadn't quite done in other years in the same way, but I have a legislative highlights that talks about all of the bills that passed, that's similar to the bill reports that we did, but I put some extra information in there, as well as at the end of that included a document that talks about the legislative outcomes for the bills that the city submitted testimony on, so you can just see the direct kind of link. And I tried to put notes in there for actually this bill, while this bill didn't pass, the language from this bill got stuck into another bill, and so it's still successful. So.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. And thank you, Alice, for all the great work. It really was helpful to receive all the ongoing updates on what was going on, as well as the times when you were too busy and told us you were too busy, which I think is a reflection of how the workload can be there. So I appreciate that. A few questions. Number one, I just want to agree with Councilmember Kostick. If there's a way for us to see if there's a pathway to be involved in whatever the summer study entails on the cell tower legislation, I think we'd all love to know about that. And if it isn't much that they're really doing, and that was just a way of dealing with the fact they had these two competing bills, that's okay. But if they're actually going to be looking at it, I'm sure my colleagues would agree too, we'd like to find a way to be involved in that. On the economic development bills that you mentioned, are there steps yet, or when would there be steps that we would need to do to try to take advantage of some of those opportunities? Is it too soon to know that yet?
So like for the fund, it has an effective date. So, first of all, we have to get through the first bill signing will be tomorrow.
Yeah.
So the next couple of weeks, the governor has the opportunity to sign the bills or veto them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't expect there to be any problems with the veto on any of those bills. But most of them have a June 1st or July 1st effective date. And it's just a matter of closely monitoring the websites, especially for the national capital legislation.
But those are opportunities where the city would have to actually apply for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. The city or specific projects within it. Yeah.
So you mentioned that, if I read it correctly, that the Route 410 legislation and the Just Cause legislation both didn't go through for sort of related reasons, although if this isn't something you want to talk about entirely, that's okay, but one of them seems hyper-local and one seems more broadly local. So how is it that they both ended up with the same fate, if I can put it that way?
So they both ended up in similar positions, I would say, in part because both went to the House Environment and Transportation Committee. So even in the case of the Just Cause legislation, it passed the delegation and then went and had a hearing in the standing committee, and leadership in that committee did not want to move the bill forward. In terms of the Route 410 legislation, it was made clear that because of concerns by the same leadership on that same committee about the bill moving forward, then the delegation wasn't as interested in pushing for a bill that they didn't think was going to get taken up. And so in both situations, there's a challenge with the chairman of that committee, in not necessarily a challenge with having enough support for the bills, but frankly, the chairman of that committee is a challenge and an obstacle in moving that, as well as the Beltway expansion legislation. It's all the same situation, and I think he has some philosophical disagreements about what the role of the state is and whether or not how much control you should give to local governments.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Two other things and a suggestion after that. So there was speed limit bill, there was speed limit legislation connected to state highways.
Yes, I
Can you
believe
say
Delegate
anything
Moon had
Yeah.
a bill about that.
Can you say a little bit about that? Because we'll shortly be receiving a petition from over 100 residents in favor of reducing the speed on part of Route 410. I'm just curious how that fits in with that.
So that is not one of the bills that we followed that
Right.
closely, but off the top of my head, I think that specifically dealt with speed limits in areas that weren't in urban zones, because we already have, it was to allow some exceptions to drop the speed limit below the current set minimum, like right now there's a floor and a ceiling that state highway has. So this was to allow, under certain circumstances, the floor to be lowered.
Okay.
That's my understanding of it. But it's not across the board dropping the floor everywhere.
Okay.
You've got to meet certain criteria.
So one other thing that struck me, I was having a conversation earlier today with one of my colleagues. So the delegation did a great job, and you mentioned some of the issues that they worked on, and I just wondered whether you and my colleagues, what you would think about doing a letter to them highlighting a few of the things that we appreciated that they did, that were specifically of interest or benefit to us, and on which they played lead roles, whether in introducing or fighting for it on the floor or anything like that. Is that a...
Yeah, I would be happy to help with that, and I think it's good, you know, as we've started just in the past couple of years doing the priorities hearing prior to session, I think that has helped helped us all engage on a deeper level. And so we did have situations where a bill would come up in committee and I would get a text from someone saying, hey, this bill just came up in my committee. I'm wondering if, you know, Tacoma Park has a position on this, or want to make sure that this is okay, or have you thought about this? So it was great to have them really paying attention at that level and thinking about impacts to the city and checking in with us.
Okay, well, I mean, I would suggest that, and I think, you know, the last thing we want to do is just sort of take for granted the fact, because I think that we have a really great team and they work really hard for us. So I would just toss that out to my colleagues as something we should think about. Thank you.
Councilwoman Bala?
Yeah, I'm the person that Councilmember Kovar had this conversation with, and I completely agree that we should go out of our way to thank our delegation, and specifically issues, including some issues that they might not have won on, but that they worked really hard on. I'm thinking in particular of Delegate Wilkins and the Just Cause bill. Yeah. I'm thinking of the successful effort to get the Clean Energy Jobs Act through, which Delegate Tricutian spent a lot of time in leadership on. And I think you mentioned the bond bill for the library, Delegate Moon and Senator Smith, and that's just to start with. I was very, very happy pleased how engaged they were. And I wanted to thank you, because it was quite a whirlwind, and I appreciated working with you on that, on all of the bills. Will your report be posted, and or are we going to wait on the legislative highlights, but post the report for residents so that residents can read it? How do you want to, when and how do you want to do that? What goes up first?
We'll work to post what's appropriate to post.
Okay, because I think residents will be really interested to hear. I wanted to ask a couple of specific questions. Do you anticipate any gubernatorial vetoes on anything, as far as you know?
On this list, not really. Most of those already happened. So the minimum wage bill, the oyster bill, as I mentioned, and the school calendar bill, all three of those were vetoed during session, and the veto was overridden. So typically when the legislature anticipates that there's going to be a bill that's going to be vetoed, they're going to send it to the governor before session is over so that he has to address it during the he has a window of so many days so that it would be kicked back so that they could do a veto override. That does make me think there's definitely going to be at least one special session, which is necessary to elect a new speaker for the House. There's discussion as to whether or not the legislature will need to deal with redistricting in the 6th district, the 6th congressional district, depending on the Supreme Court and how that goes. So there might be some then other issues that bubble up, especially as we get, depending on when and what the timing is of that, as whether or not there are revenue type bills or other things that get on that agenda.
Okay.
But if there are that is something that the
Then if
governor
there
has
is
to keep in
another
mind
veto,
about vetoes is
there'll be an
that they would
opportunity.
be convening again, and so the opportunity to override his veto very quickly would
be
present itself.
very real.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was also going to ask about the Just Cause bill, but how about, is it too early to ask what the next steps might be?
I don't know,
Too
but
early.
yeah,
Okay.
it probably.
Thank you.
But I'm sure there will be next steps on it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you not just for being here tonight, but for the good report, the good results. I think this year's report is even more positive than previous years, so I appreciate your hard work on that. I'm just curious, looking forward, about how we can think about organizing things differently next year, what improvements we can make to make life easier for you and our success rate even higher.
So it's a great question. I think one of the things that always happens is you get halfway through the session and you start to realize it would have made so much more sense if we had gone about this other way, or this could have been more efficient. So instead of, what I started doing was raising those things when it happened, to say, hey, we need to have this conversation. I've got some ideas, because typically I'll forget because you're not then in the process anymore, and so you don't remember what little efficiency improvements you could have made. So I think one of the things that we need to have a discussion about, and the council needs to think about, is what types of testimony you want to be providing to the legislature, and what types of things you weigh in on, because we've got two different kind of categories, which are, there's legislation that comes in all the time that directly affects the city. It could, affect your local, laws, especially when we talk about housing and landlord-tenant issues, or taxes. So there are things like that need analysis from a city staff perspective, and then figure out what way, what type of advocacy needs to be done or testimony provided, or things like the economic development legislation, where that was significant, robust testimony that was, about 2 pages long, and writing up suggested amendments, and then us working with our, members of the committee to try and get amendments actually written and adopted, type of thing. And then there are other things that come up all the time where it is an issue, a bill that we know is important to the Takoma Park community, that probably affects a large number of residents, that falls in the periphery of things that the city engages in or supports, but isn't a municipal function, if that makes sense. And so we have a lot of that and those are the fun things to weigh in on. So that's the stuff that you hear about all the time. And so it's making sure that we're paying attention to both sets of issues, and then figuring out the right way of the right types of testimony and how much time to spend advocating on both sides. So we've got some ideas of how we can work that out, but I think we started to hit that stride, and it was helpful to also have the council members helping write the testimony and volunteer to do that and take some of that stuff on, especially for the issue areas that you all have expertise in. And I think that really, really helped us then contribute effective testimony.
And it seems that it would be easier on you and everybody else to be able to foresee some of those earlier in the process, so that the work could begin earlier and not be so much of a crunch.
I don't think that's ever going to happen, because it's not.
That doesn't
You don't
work.
know what's going to come up until it's there, and the initial period is always the hardest because there's a couple hundred bills that are getting
Right.
introduced every day until early February, and those things are coming in and getting introduced and then immediately assigned out for hearings. And we just heard about it 3 days ago, and how do we decide? I haven't even had time to read it to figure out what we should be doing on it, but because you get that initial window where they don't have anything to do yet, people aren't putting the bills in, so the bill gets read, and the next thing you know, it's got a hearing, and then they need something to vote on, and it's moved, and you're still trying to figure out what it does. So that's just part of the process, and so we always are looking for ways to tackle that, take that on. But I think now, I think we've got a good feel for the rhythm, and that just goes.
Just one last question out of curiosity. Could we not know that some of those bills are going to be introduced if we have the right relationship with the delegates?
I mean, in some cases we do, but I think, and there's some that we always try to anticipate, and certainly we can anticipate what priorities the city is advocating for, but the legislators have lots and lots of ideas, and because the number of issues, that there's so much that the city engages on, because you have so many responsibilities, we have to watch bills in all sorts of topics, transportation, policing, housing, taxes. It's an endless amount of ideas, and I just try and pick through what I think you need to look at. It's not, there's so many more things, and there'll always be bills that didn't even make it on the list because it just didn't rank high enough. So to the extent that we can do that, we always try, but part of it is just how it goes.
Nonetheless, I certainly didn't want to sound critical, because I think you've done an excellent job. I just hope that we can make things better next year.
We're always trying for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Ms. Wilkerson, I want to thank you for your efforts. I didn't really get to participate this year. I'm chairing CPC, so been a little busy. One question regarding the marijuana legalization study group. I only suggest that you keep your ears to what is happening, because this past November I was in Los Angeles for the National League of Cities conference, and they did this big panel, and you got to go to some of the sites where they're growing the marijuana. But the issues that the local municipalities have found, I think we could really learn from them. Where can you actually use it? How do the collection of the taxes, because you can't buy it with credit cards, it's all cash business. So I think, and the total amount of taxes involved is over 30% in California. So all of that, I think, is critical if we're there at the beginning of these conversations, to make sure that local government is part of this. Because if not, then I think it's going to be detrimental to us, and we're going to have to play catch up to try to make sure we have a seat at the table.
I agree, and I would say that's something to definitely advocate internally within MML, to get them to understand how important it is to have participation, that it come from municipalities, not just from counties. With the medical program that we have now, there have been challenges with some local jurisdictions. I mean, Anne Arundel County has done everything it can to prevent dispensaries from opening there, and rewriting zoning, but I think there will also be issues that continue to come up about how marijuana is treated from a criminal perspective. And I know that there are concerns about, like, the state's made efforts to decriminalize marijuana and marijuana use. But what you end up with is, if we're going with a program that essentially mirrors how we treat alcohol, then you would see potentially similar statutes like what we have, public drinking. Like, you can't consume alcohol, walking down Carroll Avenue. But yet we have decriminalized public smoking of marijuana. How's that going to play out? I know that there are concerns about how some of those changes work. There are concerns about what happens for people who have criminal records for marijuana use. And so that's going to be part of the discussion, and that will involve discussion with police, which includes the local police chiefs and sheriffs, for which they have their own association and voice, and they advocate at the state level, and they're, people really listen to them. And so there's internal advocacy, to do there for whatever positions, the city and the city police department may want to take. So there are a number of areas to touch on, but it would be important to be participating with local governments. I can at least tell you, I'll be involved from other standpoints, so I'm happy to give updates as things go on.
And so do you think next session the legislature will be ready to drop a bill?
The goal is to have some type of legislation for next session. I believe ultimately whatever it will be a constitutional amendment, so that it will go to referendum.
Right.
And if that's the case, then they're probably going to time it so it goes to referendum with the next gubernatorial election.
Right.
So they wouldn't want to rush the timeline such that it got on the ballot for midterm elections.
Okay, great. One thing that you didn't talk about, and this is something that's a priority for me, is scooters. I know that the scooter bill, the actual speed limit passed. Do you anticipate the governor signing that bill?
I don't see why
He wouldn't?
it wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
He tends to not, he's really careful with his veto authority. We've probably seen all of the veto activity, with the exception of maybe one or two things that surprise us.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Mayor? Okay. Thanks. I've been glad not to be in the heart of the discussions this year, but clearly there were some great advances that were made on behalf of Tacoma Park, and I think that was good. As we go through the not session time, there's a couple items that have just recently arisen that maybe we can prepare for, and this I think goes to Councilmember Seaman's point that sometimes there's things that aren't necessarily within session that can move things along. One is a newly identified issue related to lead paint requirements, and an absolute unfunded mandate now on local jurisdictions about a different way of keeping information. And so our staff, only in the last week, has been corresponding and meeting with staff of other municipalities and counties. And so that may be something that either can be resolved through the administration somehow, or it may need to come as a bill to correct how that information is kept and reported. And so I can talk to you about that. One of the things that I'm interested in general is hopefully with the Kerwin Commission funding for schools and whatever, there may be some ways to help Tacoma Park in its schools, and especially if there's some more innovative or interesting collaboration programs with schools. And so I'd like to talk to you about that. The other thing is that Program Open Space has changed the way that it handles applications from small municipalities that I think is very harmful. And I think it hurts how the opportunities for small municipalities to use the funding that's available for them. So again, that may be something that can be done out of session, or else it may need to come up as a legislative item. So I just wanted to raise those three things as kind of newer topics that maybe we can address. That's it.
Great. And just to bring back not a new topic, but one that we always bring back, and I'm surprised my colleague hasn't already said it, but utilities and WSSC, and thinking about this year over the next couple of months, a really good strategy for that going into the next legislative session.
Yeah, and I was surprised. We typically see more WSSC related legislation, and there was hardly anything this year. And I don't know if in part that's because so many members of the delegation are new, and it might be folks who are putting that legislation in before aren't there. I know now Senator Kramer used to sponsor a lot of those bills as a delegate, and the Senate delegation just doesn't have the same responsibility, and so the senators tend to not sponsor as many local bills just because the House always takes it up first. They have a much more robust process and subcommittees and so on. So I think that's something where we need to be proactive in talking to our delegates about, and the rest of the county, especially if there's something that we want to see legislatively specific to WSSC, and the utilities issue generally. Also, most of the utility legislation now that we're seeing is related to like renewables. There was the community, so there are all of these the community aggregation. There's so many. They all start with community, and various the titles are all the same. So the community choice solar bill, we're seeing more on how we can make our great stuff on how we can make our utilities more renewable focused and more efficient, and doing all of these new ideas. And we've gotten away from how are our base utilities functioning, and accountability for our utilities. So it's all sort of like new ideas for things we can do with utilities versus really looking at the governance of our utilities. So that's one of those conversations that stopped happening that we're going to have to try and get going, but it's going to mean also getting other municipalities and the county and other folks engaged on it, so that the state and legislators are hearing from more than just Tacoma Park on it. So I think that's always the challenge.
Councilmember Kovar, did you have something to add on that?
Well, since you mentioned it, that was actually on my list, and I just decided where I had left it because I had some conversations with Delegate Charkoudian, who's on the subcommittee that deals with that, and she had said to me, once the dust kind of settles on the session, she'd be happy to meet, not just with me, but with any of us, to talk about that. So I kind of thought I would not mention it this time, but I agree with the mayor that should be on the list as well. So
that's one of the reasons I'm excited to have her on Economic Matters. Like, we just have not had anyone on that committee that we could really go to. So it's a real advantage.
Great. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you very much again. And I look forward to your ideas on how to improve the process for next year and working together again. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right. I think with that, that's our last item for this evening. We are adjourned.